Good evening, this is the Oscar Expert here with Brother Bro and Mrs. Oscar Expert back again.
I'm here to provide a female perspective as Priscilla requires it, but on more manly things, I step aside. I know my place.
It's time for the Priscilla review. It's a new Sofia Coppola biopic about Priscilla Presley. It follows her from just the wee age of 14 meeting Elvis all the way to the end of their relationship. This is a great chaser to the 3-hour-long Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. Really couldn't be more different of a film stylistically, in terms of the performances, like what Jacob Elordi's doing versus what Austin Butler's doing. And what better way to just talk about the Priscilla movie than to talk about the Elvis movie first, because they have a lot to do with each other, don't they? Like little twins separated in the womb. I feel like Elvis exists to affirm what we want to think about Elvis, and this movie exists to sort of spectate on this relationship from the perspective of Priscilla. If you're watching the movie like waiting for him to shake his hips, it's not gonna happen, I'm sorry. But it's what makes the movie interesting. Everything from meeting Elvis to, her just like staying at home and like waiting around just feels very unglamorous, and that is, almost aggressively like the point of the film.
You don't really get any visage into what Elvis's life is like because it seems like she wasn't a part of that unless he was in the home.
This movie has an interesting way of looking back on the past, the time, and the culture, stripping all the glamour away from it and having it just kind of sit in whatever uncomfortabilities like we can observe from it. Well, it also doesn't make a point to preach to you about the morality of the situation.
Yeah, it's very clinical. You're able to decide for yourself, but it's not hard to decide if it's good or bad.
It made me very uncomfortable. I mean, on that note, I feel like the movie's point is very obvious, and I don't know, like, how interested I was by the end in like where it was gonna go, because I'm like, okay, I know what this is. And we're kind of waiting for her rose-eyed glasses to like fade away and for her to mature just enough to like realize what's going on. There's nothing wrong with the way they wanted to tell the story, but it also was a little bit like unsurprising in general. Like when the movie ended, I was like, all right, yeah, that did what it was gonna do. But it's a good movie to reflect on. I kind of agree with what you're saying, but all those things affected my experience less. Like, I just found that what this movie was doing was interesting enough to just bask in it for the nearly 2-hour runtime. Part of me didn't want it to be so at a distance, though. Like, part of me wanted to feel the childlike excitement that she had for being like, oh my god, like, he likes me, oh my god, he picked me! And we understand what's going on with her, but we're not really participating in that emotionally. Like, we're always looking at the situation with parental goggles. Yeah, but I feel like that's what makes the movie interesting, and it definitely can't have it both ways. I think if it went in the direction I'm saying, it would be an entirely different film. If anything, like, my problem with the film is that it's just the way it is, and I don't know how much it can really milk out of the story by just being that. Being distant from it would be a little more interesting if we're not sure how we're supposed to feel about something, but it's kind of obvious when you watch the film how we're supposed to feel about it. But I think that the context of the movie makes it interesting, that we're staring at like this American giant and this cultural giant. Just the way that it portrays these two is just wildly different from anything you'll see anywhere about them.
It's interesting to have someone like that not in the lead. Like, have Elvis be there as like the supporting character.
And for the portrayal of him to be so meek and childlike.
I mean, my initial takeaway was that I thought it felt a little half-baked almost. But then when I thought about it, the detached filmmaking style kind of lends itself to the way their relationship progressed. I was really convinced that like she didn't even really know him as well as like someone would typically know their spouse. And I think that's very apparent by the way that you feel so distant from the characters.
Something about the grim tone of the movie made me feel like almost mournful for the identity she didn't have and the opportunities she didn't get to explore herself at these ripe ages. Like, there was just a sadness to the movie. But I wonder if it's too one-sided to see it as like, just, oh yeah, it's kind of sad. I looked up a couple interviews with Priscilla Presley, and she doesn't look back on it feeling sad. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of conflicted feelings, and I would have to read her autobiography to understand more. But she seems to still marvel at the fact that she dated Elvis. The portrait of this relationship is very like from another perspective and not really hers.
She likes the movie, though.
She likes the movie, and she said that was what it felt like.
Yeah.
She told Sofia Coppola that.
Her relationship to him is very complicated. Like, it was painful and detached, but she, like, still has love for him.
And she said that when she dated him, she didn't feel like she really had an identity of her own. Just thinking about her watching the movie, I think is very interesting. And her saying,
I
yeah, this
picture
is
her
what it was like.
eating Swedish fish while she watches it.
Like, because she apparently did identify with the vapidness that was this relationship and this lifestyle. I think that most people will come away from the movie thinking the relationship was probably more fucked up than she would say that it was. But I guess both things are true. And the movie does kind of end with like a I'll Always Love Him song that I didn't think hit for me.
After the fact, reading about her perspective, it like kind of clicks more for me now. The needle drop.
But in the movie, to the audience, we're like, that wasn't what I experienced. Like, I didn't even feel that love was there at all. I thought it was infatuation, and that she would soon realize like maybe she had never known what it was to be in love. But she insists to this day that Elvis is the only man that she can love. But there's actually an interesting component to that, which is not that romantic. Like, I don't think it's romantic that it's the only man she can love. I think it's sort of sad. It's definitely an interesting portrait of when someone's identity is just slowly like taken away from them. Then they're in the middle of adolescence and they should be discovering it, and they can't.
Well, that's
like,
also why it's an interesting portrait of the time, because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the only woman in the room, but
Tess is also
that's
female.
true. But women probably weren't given a ton of role models or thought that was like part of the deal for them, is that they need to like discover who they are.
I found that a lot of the times where she and Elvis are in the same frame, Elvis takes up most of the frame and she's kind of like off to the side. Like, there's the one of the few close-ups we get of their faces, his face is taking up like 3/4 of the frame. I thought there were some very skillful shots there to like kind of fill your brain with the idea that he eclipses her.
Any thoughts on like the super dim lighting? Everything's like really low key, and what? You just like it? You just get a good aesthetic?
It's very soft and girly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sofia Coppola's for the girls. Everyone knows that.
It kind of gave it that emptiness. She's walking around Elvis's legendary like Graceland mansion, and it just doesn't look fun. It just looks really boring.
Yeah, all she does is like go to different rooms and sit there.
It's like Disneyland with like the lights off or something.
I like period movies that show how boring it would be to not have a phone. Ammonite did that really well. Say what you will about it. She's
You're like,
just
man,
walking.
it would be so much better if she just had TikTok.
Priscilla is pro cell phone. Kaylee Spaney, I thought she did the little girl thing very well. Is that like a weird way to say it?
You can pretend that you would say that in a more sophisticated way, but we all know and agree with what you're saying.
She makes herself very small. She projected naivety well.
I felt a little skeptical that this 24-year-old actress could properly capture that like 14-year-oldness, which I think is important. I do want to see this character as being like a 14-year-old, meaning like, Jesus, she's only 14.
Yeah.
But I actually did feel that from the performance, and also, you know, the makeup and costumes did a great job transforming her, making her younger. I think she did a great job, and I think she did kind of transform, and throughout the movie, there's that progression, especially at the end of the movie. It's like, wow, that feels like I'm watching an adult now.
Jacob Elordi playing Elvis, I think he is pitch perfect here, and one of the most interesting parts of the story was seeing his portrayal be so incredibly different from any that you would imagine. He really betrays that image of Elvis that we all have in our heads, like in every possible way. I felt like I was watching Elvis struggle and try to come to terms with something that's not possible to come to terms with, which is like the world has adopted you and made you into an idol. He like didn't know what to do with that, and he couldn't possibly even like understand it. It wasn't exactly sympathetic. It was like he had a real like ego thing about it.
I think it humanized
Big ego about
him. Not in a flattering way, but I like the growing trend in media taking a second look at our heroes and seeing them for who they are, which is people with problems.
From my perspective, watching this movie, like, that's grooming. But
I mean, it is
wait, no,
whether...
no, I'm not done. But there's always the questions, like, does he know that he's doing it? Like, is he doing things consciously? Like, there's obviously times where he's holding power over her, but it's so difficult to tell with this character. Like, is he being a mastermind, or is he just exerting in an unhealthy way. But I think that mystery feels real to people who are like groomers or like abusers or what have you.
Well, it's interesting that you'd even think it's like a mastermind thing to control things.
Well, that's how movies like to portray like
but I agree.
manipulation.
That's how we think about like people who are in control in every element of their life. Like they wear the same outfit. And, like Steve Jobs always wears turtlenecks. Like I appreciated what this movie did. I appreciated Sofia Coppola's very specific vision for it. It did leave me feeling a little underwhelmed and wanting maybe a little bit more shades to the relationship. Instead, I feel like it's very much one thing. It is an interesting movie, though, to marinate on and think back on. So for me, it's a 7 out of 10.
I give it an 8 out of 10.
I think I agree with Brother Bro that I would have liked to see more dimensions to the relationship. And I did come away thinking it was a little half-baked. But that said, I think there was some very tactful filmmaking. I also give it a 7.
Now with awards, you better not be thinking this movie's going for Best Picture now. You know, she tends to make subdued internal films, not always the Academy's thing. I think that she needs to make like a 90 Metacritic type of like high scoring movie. I mean, even on Rotten Tomatoes, this movie's got like a 7.1 average rating. I don't think it's going for Best Picture, but I think that there are a couple nominations this movie's for sure a contender for. One of them is definitely Kaylee Spaney for Best Actress, portraying somebody who a lot of people are familiar with. You know, we saw Ana de Armas getting for Blonde despite people hating that movie.
I don't know if the performance is punchy enough, though, to make it into the top 5.
Ana de Armas could not stop sobbing. Like, the entire film, she was a wreck. And people love that. Like, and you're portraying Marilyn Monroe. That's why she got nominated.
Yeah,
I mean, Kaylee Spaney doesn't have that going for her. She doesn't have what Ana de Armas had.
She cried enough to end the drought.
Having the makeup and costumes does help you get closer to Oscar, but I just still don't think there's quite enough Oscar meat in here.
Speaking of makeup and costumes, those are two other categories I think this movie has a shot in. Probably a better shot than actress, I would think. A lot of the movie focused on her physical transformation and how Elvis was like telling her what to wear and like what kind of hairstyle or whatever.
That's true. Maybe for the hair alone.
And then costumes, they were really notable. I mean, they're also something you pay attention to acutely throughout. They did a lot of character building. It being a smaller film without like a ballroom scene makes me think, okay, maybe this doesn't get costumes after all.
You have to talk about Jacob Elordi.
As Elmas.
As Elmas.
I think that he might like pop up somewhere.
Golden Globes? They love biopics.
Maybe he's like the Eddie Redmayne in The Good Nurse or something, surprisingly. I don't think it's actually going to happen, though.
I don't think so either.
I think he's worthy.
He's very green, too. He's like definitely getting his footing in some more serious movies, but I think he probably needs a couple more years. He hasn't fully shaken the kissing booth yet.
He doesn't need to shake it. He can wear that as a badge of honor.
I mean, these are the same people that nominated last year's Elvis, which was the opposite of this. They are the kind of people who eat that shit up like dog food.
It's not the opposite of itself enough to get nominated. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
You think it would be fun to be chained to a celebrity estate?